The envelope was sitting on my kitchen counter when I got home from work that Tuesday. I almost didn't open it. I'd had a 12-hour shift, my feet were killing me, and I just wanted to make a grilled cheese and watch something mindless on Netflix. But the return address stopped me. It was from a law firm in Columbus. My parents live in Columbus. I stood there in my scrubs, still holding my keys, and something cold moved through my chest. I set my bag down slowly. I opened it. Summons to appear. My name, Margot Elaine Decker. Printed in clean black letters like I was a stranger. My parents, listed as plaintiffs. Me, the defendant. The allegation, buried in legal language I had to read 3 times, that I had wrongfully obtained and retained assets that rightfully belonged to my younger sister, thereby diminishing her financial future and inheritance prospects. I sat down on the floor right there by the front door, not on the couch, not at the table. The floor. Because the year before, I had done something that apparently made me a criminal in my family's eyes. I bought a house. A small 100 square feet in Dayton, Ohio. A 1970s ranch style with a cracked driveway and a bathroom that needed new tile. I'd saved for it for 4 years, I'd done it completely alone, and my family had decided that was a problem. Let me back up. I started working when I was 16, not because my parents made me, but because I understood, somewhere in the back of my teenage brain, that if I didn't take care of myself, nobody else was going to do it for me. Not because my parents were absent, they were very present. Just not for me. Their attention, their money, their energy, all of it flowed in one direction. Toward my sister. My sister Portia is 3 years younger than me. She is, and always has been, the favorite. I don't say that bitterly anymore. I used to. But now I just say it the bitterly anymore. I used to. But now I just say it the way you'd say the sky is blue. It's a fact. My mother once told me, when I was maybe 17 and had just gotten rejected from a scholarship I'd applied for on my own, that I needed to learn to be more resilient. Then she turned around and called Portia's school to complain that Portia had received a B- on a group project when it clearly wasn't her fault. I got my first job at a grocery store in our suburb of Columbus. I saved. I paid for my own school supplies, my own clothes, my own gas once I got my license. I never asked for anything because I learned early that asking was humiliating. The answer was usually some version of "you're so capable, you'll figure it out." Meanwhile, Portia got a car for her 16th birthday, a credit card on my father's account, and a promise that her college would be fully paid for. My college was not paid for. I knew it wouldn't be. I applied for every scholarship I could find, worked 30 hours a week through high school, and got into a nursing program in Cincinnati on a partial scholarship. I took out loans for the rest. I didn't ask my parents for help because I already knew the answer. Those 4 years in Cincinnati were the first time in my life I felt like I could breathe. I had a tiny apartment with 2 roommates, a meal plan I stretched to the last day of every month, and a part-time job at a hospital cafeteria that turned into a nursing aide position by my junior year. I called home maybe once a month. Those conversations always followed the same script. My mother would tell me about Portia's sorority, Portia's spring break trip, the new laptop they'd gotten Portia for her birthday. Then she'd ask if I was eating enough. That was usually the extent of interest in my life. I graduated with my RN license, $47,000 in student loans, and nobody in the audience cheering for me. I'd bought my own cap and gown. I'd driven myself to the ceremony. Afterward, I went to a diner alone and ordered a stack of pancakes and sat there feeling something I still can't name exactly. Not sad, not proud, somewhere in between. Like finishing a race and discovering the finish line was just the start of a longer one. I got a job at a hospital in Dayton. Good pay, decent hours once I got off night shifts, solid benefits. I was aggressive about my loans. Every raise, every tax refund, every extra shift went toward that balance. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment that I furnished mostly from Facebook Marketplace in a Goodwill 3 blocks away. I didn't take vacations those first 2 years. I ate a lot of rice and beans and rotisserie chicken. I built a budget in a spreadsheet and I checked it every Sunday morning with my coffee. 4 years after graduation, I had paid off every dollar of my loans. I had $68,000 in savings. I didn't tell anyone, not even my 2 closest friends from nursing school. I just kept going. The house came up almost by accident. A colleague of mine mentioned her neighbor was selling privately. Not listing yet, just putting word out, and the price was below market because they wanted a quick close. I went and lifted it on a Thursday after my shift. The backyard had this old oak tree that had dropped leaves all over the grass, and the kitchen had these yellow laminate counters that were deeply ugly, and I stood in the empty living room and thought, this is mine if I want it. I wanted it. I put in an offer that weekend. It was accepted Monday. I cried in my car in the hospital parking garage before my shift. Happy crying. The kind where you're not even sure why you're crying except that something you worked toward for a very long time has suddenly become real. I closed in October. I painted the front door navy blue. I ripped out the yellow laminate myself over a long weekend with a YouTube tutorial and a pry bar I borrowed from a neighbor. I bought a new kitchen faucet and paid a plumber to install it. These are small things. They were enormous to me. I posted one photo on Instagram, just the front of the house with my navy door and a single caption, home. Nothing else. That was my mistake, or so it turned out. My mother called me within the hour. I remember being surprised. She rarely called. We usually just texted surface-level things, but she called, and her voice had that particular tone, the one that means she is performing calm while actually furious. When did you buy a house? I just closed last week. You didn't say anything. I know. I wanted to wait until it was done. There was a pause. How did you afford that? I explained, savings, nursing salary, paid off my loans. She was quiet in a way that made the back of my neck prickle. Then she said, your father and I will talk. I didn't know what that meant. I assumed it meant nothing. I was wrong. About a month later, I got a call from my aunt, my mother's sister, who I've always been closer to than my own parents. She was whispering, which told me she didn't want to be overheard. She told me that my parents had been talking to Portia and that there had been some kind of family meeting I wasn't invited to. The consensus, apparently, was that because my parents had given Portia so much financial support over the years while giving me nothing, I had been able to accumulate wealth that was essentially built on an unfair advantage because I'd had to learn to save while Portia hadn't. Therefore, some portion of what I'd saved should be shared with Portia to even things out. I had to sit with that for a minute. They were arguing that because they had neglected me financially, I had developed skills that allowed me to build savings, and those savings were unfair to the sister they had funded completely. They're talking about getting a lawyer, my aunt said. Still whispering. You're kidding, I said. She wasn't. The next few weeks were surreal. I went to work. I came home to my house with the navy door and the new kitchen faucet. I started getting texts from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Cousins, my mother's college friend who'd always sent Christmas cards, an uncle who had once given me a $20 bill at a graduation party and apparently considered us close. All of them had heard some version of the story. All of them had an opinion. Most of the opinions involved me being selfish. Portia has always struggled with money, one cousin texted. You know how she is. A little generosity wouldn't hurt. I did not respond. My father called me once during this period. Just once. He said in his measured way that he hoped I would think about the family as a whole and that this kind of division isn't good for anyone. I asked him what division he was referring to specifically. He said he thought I knew. I said I didn't. He said maybe I should call Portia. I said maybe Portia should call me. He hung up. 2 weeks after that call, I got the summons. I want to be clear about something. Up to this point in my life, I had been what my friends charitably called a conflict avoider. I didn't like confrontation. I absorbed things. I moved on quietly. I once let a roommate stop paying her share of utilities for 3 months before saying anything. This was a known flaw of mine. I'd been working on it. But something about that summons, my name printed on legal paper like I'd done something wrong, cleared something out of me. I felt something I hadn't felt before, not in all the years of being the invisible daughter. I felt angry. Clean, cold, clarifying anger. Not the crying kind. The kind that makes you organized. I called a lawyer the next morning. Her name was Ms. Waverly. She ran a small practice in Dayton, and my coworker recommended her because she'd helped her through a landlord dispute. I sat in Ms. Waverly's office and laid out every document I had. My loan history, my payoff records, my savings account statements, 4 years of tax returns, my closing documents, every receipt I had from my time in Cincinnati. Miss Waverly was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "Your parents have no legal claim to your savings or your property." None. What they're describing isn't a legal theory. It's a grievance. So this gets dismissed, I said. I expect so. But you'll still need to appear and respond formally. Don't ignore it. I didn't ignore it. What I did in the weeks between receiving that summons and the court date was something I hadn't done before. I started talking. I called my aunt, the one who had warned me, and I told her everything. The full picture. Not just the house, but everything. The grocery store job at 16. The scholarship applications. The graduation I attended alone. The $47,000 in loans I'd paid off by myself while Portia's education cost my parents north of $90,000 by my rough calculation. The Goodwill furniture. The years of rice and beans. My aunt was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I didn't know all of that." "Nobody asked," I said. She called me back 3 days later. She'd apparently had a few conversations of her own. She told me that several relatives, once they'd heard the actual full story, had a very different reaction than they'd initially had. Not all of them, but some. The court date came in March. Cold morning, pale sky. I wore my best blazer, the charcoal one I bought secondhand from a consignment shop downtown and had dry cleaned twice. I met Ms. Waverly outside the courthouse at 8:15. My parents were already inside. My mother was wearing her church clothes, which I recognized as a deliberate choice. She always dressed for the audience she wanted. My father sat next to her looking like a man who had committed to a plan he was no longer sure about. Portia wasn't there. I don't know if that was strategic or if she'd wanted no part of it. I've wondered since. The judge was a woman in her 60s with the kind of face that does not reveal anything. She read through the filing. She asked my parents' attorney some questions. The attorney, a young man who looked slightly uncomfortable, attempted to articulate the theory that my accumulation of savings was somehow connected to the unequal distribution of parental resources and therefore constituted an unjust enrichment scenario. The judge looked at him over her glasses. "Counsel," she said, "are you arguing that because your clients chose not to financially support the plaintiff, excuse me, the defendant, that defendant somehow owes restitution to a third party who received that support instead?" The attorney said that was a simplified way of putting it. The judge said it was also an accurate way of putting it. The case was dismissed before lunch. My parents were ordered to pay a portion of my legal fees. I walked out into the cold March air and stood on the courthouse steps for a minute. Miss Waverly was saying something about paperwork and final billing, and I was nodding, but I wasn't really hearing her. I was thinking about a Tuesday night standing in my kitchen in my scrubs, holding that envelope. And how far that felt from this moment, even though it had only been about 4 months. My father texted me that evening. Just 2 words. "I'm sorry." I stared at it for a while. I didn't respond that night. I'm still not sure what the right response is. Some doors, once they've been broken open, don't go back to what they were. My mother has not contacted me. Portia texted me 3 weeks after the court date. A long, winding message about how she hadn't known about the lawsuit until it was filed, how she'd told our parents she wanted nothing to do with it, how she was sorry. I read it twice. I believe her mostly. Portia has her own complicated relationship with our parents that I don't fully understand. She's been their instrument more than their beneficiary, I think. Though she got the material things. What she didn't get was the chance to learn what I learned. That might be its own kind of poverty. I haven't responded to her text yet either. I'm taking my time with things I can't take back. My aunt came to visit in April. She brought a casserole and we sat at my kitchen table. The one I'd found at an estate sale for $40, stripped and refinished myself over a weekend. And I told her everything I hadn't said in all the years I'd been quietly getting on with it. She listened. She didn't try to explain my parents or excuse them. She just listened. That was more than I'd gotten from most people in my life, and I didn't take it for granted. The oak tree in my backyard was starting to bud when she visited. I'd raked all the leaves the previous fall, and now something was coming back. I took that personally. In a good way. There's something I've been thinking about a lot since all of this happened. I spent most of my life making myself small enough not to be a burden. Not asking, not expecting. Absorbing every quiet message that I was on my own and that this was somehow my natural condition. I thought I was being strong. And in some ways I was, I learned things I wouldn't trade. But strength that comes from having no other option isn't the same as strength you choose. I'm not the same person who stood on that floor with that envelope. Something shifted in that courthouse. Something I'm still mapping. I started talking to a therapist in January. My insurance covers it. Something I would have felt guilty about using a few years ago. We talk about what it means to stop bracing, to stop moving through life in a kind of permanent defensive crouch. I also started something I hadn't planned on. A few nurses I work with, younger ones, new grads especially, started coming to me with financial questions. How do I handle my loans? Should I do a high-deductible plan? What's an HSA? How do you actually make a budget that works? I didn't have formal training, just 4 years of doing it under pressure. But I started sitting with them in the break room during slow nights and walking through what I knew. One of them paid off her first credit card balance in 3 months and texted me at midnight to tell me. I took a screenshot of that text. It's still on my phone. I don't know what that becomes. Maybe nothing formal. Maybe something. I'm not in a hurry. My house is the same 1,100 square feet. The oak tree is fully leafed out now. Big and green and a little messy, dropping things into the yard that I rake up on weekends. The bathroom still needs new tile. I'm doing it myself this summer. I watched 12 tutorial videos and I bought a tile saw, and some of my colleagues think I've lost my mind, and maybe I have, a little. But it's mine. I paid for it myself, every dollar, every hour. Nobody gave it to me and nobody can take it from me. That's not a small thing, that's everything. People ask me sometimes, now that enough time has passed and I can talk about it without that tight feeling in my chest, whether I'm angry, whether I hate my parents, whether I feel like I won. I don't really have clean answers to any of those questions. What I know is this: every outcome in my life, good and bad, grew directly from a choice someone made. My parents chose, consistently and over many years, to pour their resources and attention in one direction. That choice shaped 2 daughters in ways I don't think they fully understood or intended. It taught Portia that support was something that just arrived, that someone else would handle the hard parts. It taught me, not gently, not kindly, but effectively, that if I wanted something, I had better figure out how to build it myself. I'm not grateful for the neglect. I want to be clear about that. I don't think being left to fend for yourself is secretly a gift. It costs me things I'll never fully inventory. The ease of having someone in your corner, the ability to ask for help without feeling ashamed of the asking. Years of quietly believing I just wasn't worth the investment. Those aren't small losses. I sat across from my therapist and named them one by one, and it took a while. But here's what I've come to understand about cause and effect: the things we practice, we become. Not because the universe is keeping score or rewarding virtue. Just because practice compounds. I practiced budgeting until it became instinct. I practiced showing up to hard jobs when I didn't want to until showing up became my default setting. I practiced sitting with discomfort, financial, emotional, relational, until I stopped being afraid of it. None of that was noble while it was happening. It was just survival. But survival done long enough builds something. My parents practiced something too, without realizing it. They practiced prioritizing comfort over honesty with themselves about what their choices were doing to both of their children. And that practice compounded as well. It compounded until they were sitting in a courthouse making an argument that a judge dismissed before noon, having spent money on legal fees to pursue a grievance that had no legal foundation. That's not a punishment I arranged. That's just what happens when years of a particular kind of thinking reach their logical end. The thing I keep coming back to. The thing Ms. Waverly said to me almost offhandedly as we walked out of the courthouse. You build something real and real things hold up. I've turned that over 100 times. Because I think that's what integrity actually is. When you strip away everything decorative about the word, it's just the practice of building things that hold up under pressure. Not because you're performing virtue for an audience, but because you've decided that's who you're going to be when nobody's watching. I think about the young nurses I sit with in the break room now, walking through their first budgets, talking about their loans. None of them asked to be in debt. None of them had a perfect start. What they have is right now, and the decision about what to practice with it. I try to tell them that quietly, without making it a speech. Just, here's what I did, here's what worked, here's what it cost, here's what it built. You decide what that means for you. Margot figured it out. Not because she was exceptional. Because she kept going. That's available to more people than they think.